The silk tie slipped through David Chambers' fingers as he adjusted it in the master bathroom's ornate mirror, his reflection revealing the slight tremor in his hands. At 55, he had built Chambers and Sterling Construction into an empire that defined the skyline of Chicago. Yet, something in his steady world had started to shift. His phone buzzed on the marble countertop, Ethan's name lighting up the screen. His eldest son, who at 28 had recently become a junior partner at Whitman and Blake, had grown uncharacteristically distant since joining the prestigious law firm 6 months ago. "Ethan?" David answered, unable to mask the eagerness in his voice. "Dad." There was something unfamiliar in Ethan's tone, a tension that hadn't been there before. I just wanted to wish you and Mom a happy anniversary." David settled onto the padded bench by the window, watching the sunset cast warm amber tones over the manicured backyard. "Thanks, son. We miss you at Sunday dinners. The firm keeping you that busy?" A pause hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. "Yeah, you know how it is. Big cases, long hours." Ethan cleared his throat. "Listen, Dad, are you happy?" The question caught David off guard. "Of course, I'm happy. Why would you ask that?" "No reason. Just been thinking about marriage lately. Jessica and I are considering taking that step." David smiled, though something in his son's voice tugged at him. "You know, when you find the right person." "Dad, I should go. Client meeting. Have a great dinner, okay?" The call ended abruptly, leaving David staring at his phone. He opened his photo gallery, scrolling to a family picture from Christmas just 7 months ago, though it felt like years. Olivia, his middle child, stood slightly apart from the group, her usual confidence dimmed. She'd missed the last 3 family gatherings, citing urgent matters at her marketing firm where she had recently become an executive. Ryan, his youngest at 22, carried that same guarded expression he had worn since starting his final semester at Northwestern. The boy who had once shared everything with his father now offered only vague answers about classes and future plans. His phone buzzed again, a text from Allison, "The reservation's at 8. Don't be late. I have a surprise." David replied quickly, looking forward to it, then checked his calendar. Another high-level meeting he should have been a part of but hadn't known about until after the fact. Paul, his business partner of 30 years, had signed off on the lakeside project revisions without consulting him, the 3rd time this month. A movement outside caught his eye. Allison in the garden below, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Even from this distance, he could see the intensity in her stance. She glanced up at the window, and David stepped back instinctively, feeling oddly like an intruder in his own home. "Mr. Chambers?" Maria, their housekeeper of 15 years, appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Chambers asked me to remind you about the time. She left a few minutes ago. Said she'd meet you at the restaurant." David checked his watch. 7:30. "Thank you, Maria. Any idea what surprise she's planning?" Something flickered across Maria's face. Concern? Pity? But it was gone so quickly David wondered if he'd imagined it. "No, sir." She didn't say. As he gathered his wallet and keys, his phone lit up with a text from Olivia. "Love you, Dad. Call me tomorrow?" Another from Ryan. "Happy anniversary. We should grab coffee soon." The messages should have warmed his heart, but instead, they left a kill. His children had never been this openly affectionate, not all at once. In the garage, David slid into his Mercedes, the engine humming to life. Through the windshield, he caught sight of the family photo hanging on the wall, all 5 of them at Olivia's college graduation 3 years ago. Happy, united, real, wasn't it? The security gate swung open, and David drove through, nodding to Jim, the guard who had manned their entrance for the past decade. Jim's wave seemed hesitant, his usual friendly smile subdued. As David turned onto the main road, the setting sun reflected off his wedding ring, casting golden light across the dashboard. 30 years, 3 children, an empire built from nothing, a life that looked perfect on the outside. So why did he feel like he was driving towards something that would shatter it all? 6 months earlier, the leather chair creaked as Ethan Chambers leaned back in his new office at Whitman and Blake, the city lights twinkling 40 stories below. The clock read 11:42 p.m., another late night, though this one felt different. The file open on his laptop wasn't a case he'd been assigned. It wasn't even supposed to be in the firm's database. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten the moment he'd spotted that photograph buried in an old identity fraud case from Nevada. Young, vibrant, with the same dimpled smile he'd seen in countless family photos. But the name beneath it wasn't Allison Roberts. It wasn't Allison Chambers. The woman in the mugshot was Angela Martinez, wanted for identity theft and fraud across Arizona, Nevada, and California. His office phone rang, startling him. Olivia's name flashed on the display. "Do you know what time it is?" she asked when he answered. "I need you to come to my office," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Now, and call Ryan." "Ethan, I have an early meeting, Olivia." He rarely used this tone with his siblings. "Trust me, you need to see this." An hour later, Olivia's heels clicked across the marble floor, Ryan trailing behind her in northwestern sweats. "This better be good," Olivia started, but the words died in her throat when she saw Ethan's face. "What's wrong?" Ethan turned his laptop around. "Tell me that's not Mom. 20 years younger. Different name. But tell me that's not her." Ryan leaned in, his usual easygoing smile fading. "Holy crap." Olivia sank into one of the client chairs. "This has to be a mistake. Some kind of look-alike. I've spent the last 4 hours digging." Ethan cut in. "The prints match records from San Quentin." "Olivia, remember those photographs you found in the attic last year?" Olivia's face went pale. "The ones with the other family in Phoenix? Mom said they were distant relatives." "They weren't relatives." Ethan pulled up another file. "That was her first family, before she disappeared with their savings." Ryan paced the office. "What are we supposed to do with this? We can't just, there's more." Ethan's voice was heavy. "I found some financial records. Recent ones. Mom and Uncle Paul. They're planning something. Something with the company." Olivia straightened. "What kind of something?" "They're going to force Dad out. I don't have all the details yet, but there are draft documents, ownership transfers." Ethan spread printouts across his desk. "They've been working on this for months." The siblings stared at the evidence before them, each lost in their own thoughts, the city humming below, oblivious to the way their world was tilting on its axis. "We need help," Olivia finally said. "Professional help. I know someone, Frankie. DeWitt. She's a private investigator, very discreet. Works with my firm sometimes on corporate matters." Ryan dropped into the other chair. "Jesus, we're talking about our mother." "No," Ethan corrected grimly. "We're talking about Angela Martinez, and we need to know exactly who that is." Olivia pulled out her phone. "I'm texting Frankie now. But what do we tell Dad?" "Nothing. Not yet." Ethan stood, moving to the window. "We need to know everything first. Every detail, every secret." The room fell silent as the weight of their decision settled over them. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice small in the large office. "I knew something was wrong. All those times Mom would disappear for days. The way she and Uncle Paul would stop talking when any of us walked into a room." Olivia reached over and gripped his hand. "We all knew something was off. We just didn't want to see it." Ethan turned back to them, his expression set. "Well, now we're seeing it, and we're going to do something about it." He gathered the printouts into a folder. "Olivia, set up a meeting with your PI. Ryan, I need you to go through Dad's office at home, carefully. Look for anything unusual in his financial records." "What are you going to do?" Olivia asked. Ethan stared at the mugshot still glowing on his screen. "I'm going to keep digging, and I'm going to find out exactly what they're planning." 3 months into their investigation, the siblings sat in Frankie Dwyer's cluttered office, surrounded by the evidence of their mother's past lives. The private investigator's reputation for discretion had proven warranted. Her office in a sleek Chicago high-rise revealed nothing of the secrets it contained. "You're sure about this?" Frankie asked, spreading out her latest findings. "Once we start pulling these threads, there's no going back." The siblings exchanged glances. Each new discovery had only made their decision harder. "Show us everything," Olivia said quietly. Frankie pulled out a thick file. Angela Martinez served 2 years in San Quentin for fraud in the early 90s. After that, she reinvented herself under various names. She paused, gauging their reactions. She had a particular pattern. integrating herself into wealthy social circles, building trust, then vanishing with whatever she could take. Ethan leaned forward. But something changed when she met Dad. Your father was different, Frankie confirmed. Wealthy, but self-made. Careful with trust, but generous once earned. And most importantly, she pulled out another document. He had a business partner who was willing to play the long game. Olivia's fingers tightened on her armrest. Uncle Paul. Paul Sterling had been running small-scale financial schemes for years before he met your father, Frankie explained. When Angela came into the picture, she spread out bank statements and transfer records. They recognized each other. Ryan's voice was hollow. So they've been planning this for 30 years? Not everything was planned, Frankie said quietly. She pulled out one more document. This might be the hardest part. The siblings stared at the DNA test results, though they'd suspected since finding the old photographs. The timing of their mother's absences, Paul's constant presence. We need help securing the evidence, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the revelation. Someone Dad trusts completely. Frankie nodded. I've already vetted Preston Schmidt. His loyalty to your father is genuine, and his digital security expertise will be crucial for verifying the financial records. Olivia pulled out her tablet. We have 3 weeks until their anniversary dinner. Whatever they're planning, we need to decide, Ethan said. Do we tell Dad everything now or do we wait? Olivia finished. Let them show their hand. Ryan stood, moving to the window. I hate this, having to strategize just to protect our own father. Ethan joined him. We're protecting him because we love him, because he's our father in every way that matters. Frankie held out a thick envelope. Everything's in here. Evidence, DNA results, financial trails. Your mother's abandoned family in Arizona is still searching for answers. 2 half-siblings who never knew what happened to her. Once you leave with this, you're committed. Are you sure? The siblings looked at each other, years of shared history passing between them in a glance. Finally, Ethan reached for the envelope. We're sure, he said. Whatever happens next, we choose truth. We choose Dad. They left Frankie's office together, stepping into the bright Chicago afternoon. The city rushed around them, unchanged, while their world had shifted on its axis. The envelope in Ethan's briefcase felt heavy with the weight of secrets and choices, of love and betrayal, of a truth that would change everything. But they had made their choice. Now, they just had to live with it. Crystal sconces cast honeyed light across La Maison Cherise's private dining room, where garlands of white roses and silver anniversary decorations adorned the walls. A champagne fountain bubbled softly in the corner, its glasses arranged in delicate tiers. The table, set with the restaurant's finest Limoges china and sterling silver, gleamed beneath a crystal chandelier. At 8:17 p.m., David Chambers' footsteps echoed on the herringbone oak floor as the maitre d' led him through the main dining room. Chicago's elite barely glanced up from their meals, unaware of the drama about to unfold in their midst. A large screen dominated one wall of the private room, displaying a carefully curated slideshow of wedding photographs. Young David in his tuxedo, Allison radiant in white lace, their first dance at the Astoria, champagne toasts, and loving glances. A 30-year narrative of supposed happiness cycling on endless repeat. You're late, Allison said, her burgundy lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, Paul Sterling positioned strategically at her right hand. Their 3 children were arranged along the sides, their faces masks of careful neutrality. David absorbed every detail with a businessman's precision. The formal table setting for what should have been an intimate family dinner, the strategic positioning of chairs, the leather portfolio placed with mathematical precision at his designated seat. Everything orchestrated, everything planned. Traffic on Michigan Avenue, he replied evenly, though he had actually spent 20 minutes in his car around the corner, trying to steady his nerves. Something in Ethan's earlier phone call had set him on edge, and 30 years in business had taught him to trust his instincts. That's fitting, Allison replied, her manicured fingers trailing along the stem of her champagne flute. You were always late to see what was right in front of you. She slid the leather portfolio across the polished mahogany. But we're done waiting. David remained standing, studying his wife's face. The face he'd woken up to for 30 years, the mother of his children, the woman he'd built a life with. Had she always been this stranger with the calculating eyes and choreographed movements? "Aren't you going to sit, David?" Paul asked, his tone carrying that same patronizing note he'd used in recent board meetings. "We have matters to discuss." David glanced at his children. Ethan sat straight-backed, his lawyer's composure firmly in place. Olivia kept her eyes on her water glass, turning it slowly between her fingers. Ryan seemed to be holding his breath. "It's a celebration, isn't it?" David said mildly, finally taking his seat. 30 years is quite an achievement. An achievement. Allison laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, it's been an achievement all right. Maintaining this charade, playing the dutiful wife while you remained blissfully ignorant. Sign these papers and disappear." She tapped the portfolio with one perfectly manicured nail. "I've been sleeping with Paul for decades. He's their real father. You were just the bank account, the respectable name, the fool who never questioned why his business partner spent so much time with his wife." The words hit like physical blows. But years of high-stakes negotiations had taught David to maintain his composure. He watched his children's reactions instead. The way Ethan's jaw tightened, how Olivia's fingers whitened around her glass, the slight tremor in Ryan's shoulders. "Nothing to say?" Paul leaned forward, confidence radiating from every gesture. "The papers are simple enough. Sign over your controlling interest in the company. Admit to some creative accounting we've documented, and you can walk away with your reputation relatively intact. Fight us, and well, he shrugged. "We have enough evidence of your supposed misconduct to bury you." On the screen, the wedding photos continued their relentless parade. David in his tuxedo, beaming. Allison in white lace, radiant. Their first dance, their shared cake, their joined hands showing brand new rings. 3 decades of carefully constructed fiction. The children exchanged glances, meaningful looks that might have gone unnoticed by someone who hadn't spent years reading people across negotiating tables. David caught the subtle nod Ethan gave his siblings. The way Olivia's posture shifted ever so slightly. "You've always been thorough, Paul," David said, reaching for the portfolio, but not opening it. "It's what made you such a good partner. Or at least, what made you appear to be one." Allison's smile faltered, just slightly. "What are you talking about?" "Before we discuss paperwork," David said, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had built an empire, "there's something you should see." The wedding photos vanished from the screen as David connected his phone to the display system. For a moment, the walls showed only darkness, reflecting the tense faces around the table like a portentous mirror. Then the first image appeared, a mugshot. A younger Allison, no, a younger Angela Martinez, stared out at them, holding a prisoner number in front of her designer blazer. The timestamp showed 1992, San Quentin State Prison. Allison lunged across the table, reaching for David's phone with a grace turned suddenly feral. "What do you think you're doing?" Ethan rose smoothly to block her path, his height and presence forming an immovable barrier. "Wait, Mom, or should we call you Angela? There's more you need to see." "Sit down," Paul ordered, his businessman's authority cracking like thin ice. "Whatever you think you've found." "Oh, we found everything," Olivia said quietly, withdrawing a thick envelope from her Hermes bag. Her marketing executive's eye for presentation was evident in how she spread the documents across the table. "Every identity, every con, every family you left behind." The screen changed again. Newspaper headlines about Angel Starr, the adult film actress who disappeared with a producer's entire investment. Court documents detailing fraud charges in Arizona, Nevada, and California. Marriage certificates showing different names, but always the same face. "This is ridiculous," Allison sputtered, her perfect composure fracturing. "David, you can't believe there's more," Ryan cut in, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "About moms, other family, about who we really are." David watched the color drain from Paul's face as more documents appeared on the screen. Bank transfers, secret accounts, coded messages spanning decades. Their careful plan to seize control of Chambers and Sterling Construction laid bare in damning detail. This is how it was supposed to go, isn't it? Ethan said, still standing between his mother and the evidence of her past. You'd humiliate Dad, force him to sign everything over, make him think he'd failed as a businessman and a father, just like you did to the others. Allison's composure shattered completely. She spun toward Paul, her voice rising to a pitch that made the crystal glasses sing. You said all the records were buried. You promised me there was no trace. Be quiet. Paul snapped, but it was too late. Olivia spread photographs across the table. Old Polaroids found in the attic showing a younger Angela Martinez with another family, another husband, another life. Did you ever love any of them? Or were they all just marks to you? You don't understand, Allison began, her voice taking on the persuasive tone that had convinced so many others. Everything I did for us. For this family. No, Ryan interrupted, his voice shaking. A family isn't built on lies. Dad taught us that. The truth, once unleashed, swept through the room like a cleansing fire. Ethan, Olivia, and Ryan took turns revealing each piece of evidence, each discovery that had led them to this moment. It started with a case file. Ethan explained, his lawyer's training evident in his methodical presentation. A facial recognition system at Whitman and Blake flagged Mom's photo in an old fraud case. That led us to Angela Martinez, and everything unraveled from there. Olivia, applying her marketing executive skill for narrative, produced more documents. The money trails were fascinating. Actually, all those spa weekends were really meetings with other marks, weren't they? Setting up the next con while maintaining this one. You went through my private records? Allison demanded, but her outrage sounded hollow now. No, we went through Angela Martinez's records, Ryan corrected. He turned to David. Dad, they've been planning this for months. The company takeover, the public humiliation, everything. David nodded slowly, his mind racing through 30 years of memories, recontextualizing every moment. The Henderson project delays, the missing contracts, the sudden board member resignations. You've been systematically undermining my position for months, haven't you, Paul? His business partner's silence was answer enough. You are going to humiliate our father today, Ethan said, his voice hard. Instead, you've exposed yourself. Every scheme, every lie, every manipulation. It's all documented. Ryan pressed play on his phone, and Allison's voice filled the room. Once David signs over control, we'll transfer everything offshore. He'll be too ashamed to fight back. The great David Chambers, fooled by his wife and best friend for 30 years. The recording continued, detailing plans for their hostile takeover, their intention to destroy not just David's business, but his very sense of self. Each word stripped away another layer of Allison's carefully maintained facade. The other families, Olivia added, spreading more photographs. Did you think they'd never find each other? Never compare notes? Allison's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table surface, her mind visibly working through options, looking for an escape route. David, she tried again, her voice softening to the tone that had won him over 30 years ago. You don't understand what it was like for me. Where I came from, the quiet authority in David's voice stopped her cold. Don't try to justify what you did to those other families. To our children. To me. They're not your children. Paul cut in, a last desperate attempt at wound inflicting. They never were. I'm their father. Biology doesn't make a father, Ryan snapped. Love does. Trust does. Everything you and Mom tried to destroy today. That's what makes a father. The screen continued its relentless display of evidence. Bank statements showing systematic embezzlement, recordings of phone calls plotting the company takeover, emails between Allison and Paul spanning years of deception. You recorded everything, Allison realized, staring at her children with something like respect. Every meeting, every call. We learned from the best, didn't we? Olivia's smile was razor sharp. You taught us how to manipulate situations, read people, gather leverage. We just used it to protect someone we love instead of destroy them. David watched his children. These remarkable adults who had chosen truth over comfort, justice over ease. They'd spent months protecting him, gathering evidence, preparing for this moment. All those canceled dinners, those distant phone calls, those careful interactions, they hadn't been pulling away. They'd been building a shield wall around him. "Did you ever love any of us?" Ryan asked suddenly, his voice small despite his earlier strength. "Even a little?" The question hung in the air, heavy with 3 decades of birthdays, school plays, family dinners. Moments that had meant everything to the children and nothing to the woman who'd pretended to be their mother. Allison opened her mouth, closed it again. For once, the consummate con artist had no ready lie to offer. "Your plays were boring," she finally said, brutal honesty replacing manipulation at last. "Your achievements were ordinary. You were just parts of the con, tools to make David trust me more. The perfect family to complete the perfect image." The cruelty of her words hit each sibling differently. Ethan's jaw clenched, Olivia's eyes filled with angry tears. Ryan seemed to physically shrink, but none of them backed down. The elegant room, with its roses and champagne fountain, its crystal and china, had become a battlefield where the weapons were truth and the casualties were 30 years of lies. The wedding photos had long since faded from the screen, replaced by the irrefutable evidence of decades of deception. David stood, buttoning his suit jacket with steady hands. In the face of exposed lies and shattered illusions, he found himself standing with the only truth that mattered: the love of 3 children who had chosen him, protected him, and proven that real family transcends biology. The chandelier light caught their faces. Ethan's unwavering strength, Olivia's fierce protection, Ryan's hard-won courage. In their eyes, David saw not the betrayal of their mother and biological father, but the triumph of the values he had spent 30 years teaching them. The truth had done its work. The carefully constructed facade of Allison Roberts Chambers had crumbled completely, revealing Angela Martinez in all her desperate, calculating glory. Paul Sterling, the trusted business partner and secret conspirator, sat deflated in his expensive suit, 30 years of schemes collapsing around him. And in the wreckage of exposed lies, a different kind of family stood united, not by blood or deception, but by choice and truth and hard-won wisdom. The crystal chandeliers of La Maison Cherie still sparkled overhead, but their light felt different now, harder, more revealing. David Chambers sat at the head of the table where Allison had presided just minutes before, his children's revelations settling around him like falling ash. "How long?" he asked finally, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "How long? Have you been protecting me?" Ethan glanced at his siblings before answering. 6 months since I found the case file. But looking back, I think we all knew something was wrong long before that. We just didn't want to see it." Olivia reached across the table, covering her father's hand with her own. "Those family gatherings I kept canceling? I was meeting with Frankie Dwyer, tracking down Mom's, Angela's other victims, building the case. And all those late nights at the library?" David turned to Ryan. "You weren't studying for finals, were you?" Ryan shook his head. "I was going through company records, Dad, looking for patterns in the contracts Paul had been handling alone. The numbers, they didn't add up." Across the table, Allison's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the leather portfolio she'd intended to be David's downfall. Her calculated mask had cracked, revealing something desperate and feral underneath. Beside her, Paul sat like a deflated suit, 30 years of schemes collapsing around him. "You can't prove any of this." Paul tried, but his businessman's confidence had evaporated. The documents could be forged, the recordings manipulated. Preston Schmidt verified everything. Ethan cut in, his lawyer's training evident in his precise tone. "Every signature, every transaction, every recording. He's prepared to testify about the digital forensics." David nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. "Preston, that's why he kept asking about our old server systems, about backing up the company archives." He turned to Allison, studying the face he'd woken up to for 30 years. "Was any of it real? Does it matter now?" Allison's voice was cold, her smile twisted. "The great David Chambers, builder of empires, couldn't even see what was happening in his own home. Your precious integrity, your trust in people, they made you the perfect mark. No, Olivia interjected, her marketing executive's poise giving way to raw anger. They made him a good man, something you wouldn't understand. David raised a hand, silencing the room. From his briefcase, he withdrew a stack of documents. Not the ones Allison and Paul had prepared, but others, carefully assembled over months by his children and verified by Preston. Bigamy in Arizona, he began, laying down the first paper. Outstanding warrants in Nevada and California. Fraud charges that never expired. And these. He spread out contracts bearing Paul's signature, deals with their competitors that bled company resources into offshore accounts. Your own greed left. A trail. The color drained from Paul's face as he recognized the contracts. Where did you get those? You taught me well, Ryan said quietly. All those summers interning at the company, learning the filing systems, the document codes. Did you think I was just a college kid making coffee? Allison's eyes darted between the documents and the door, calculating odds, planning escape routes. It was fascinating, David thought, to finally see her mind working without the mask of loving wife and mother. Had she always been this transparent, and he'd simply refused to see? David, she tried again, her voice shifting to the soft, persuasive tone that had won him over 30 years ago. We can still handle this privately. Think about the scandal, the damage to the company's reputation, the damage you were planning to inflict anyway. Ethan's voice was sharp. We have the recordings, remember? Every detail of how you were going to destroy him publicly. Olivia pulled out her tablet, opening files with quick, precise movements. The press releases you drafted, the staged photos, the fake audit reports. We found them all. You weren't just planning to take his company. You wanted to humiliate him completely. David watched his children, these remarkable adults who had orchestrated their own counter-strategy, who had chosen truth over comfort, who had proven that real family transcends biology. Their recent distance hadn't been rejection. It had been protection, investigation, preparation for this moment. I should have seen it, he said softly. The way you've changed these past months. Ethan turning down partner track to stay close to the evidence. Olivia canceling event she would never normally miss. Ryan's sudden interest in corporate finance. We couldn't tell you, Ryan explained, his voice thick. We had to be sure. About everything. About them. About the plan. About. He swallowed hard. About who we really were. The biological truth hung unspoken between them. Paul might have contributed DNA, but he had never been their father. That role belonged to the man who had taught them about integrity, who had shown them what real love looked like, who had unknowingly inspired them to risk everything to protect him. It's over, David said finally, gathering the documents into a neat pile. The bubble of lies you've built, the schemes you've planned, all of it ends tonight. Allison's carefully maintained composure crumbled completely. You would really press charges? Air all this publicly? After 30 years? 30 years of lies, Olivia finished. 30 years of manipulating our father, using us as props in your long con. Did you really think we'd let you destroy him? The chandelier light caught the tears in Ryan's eyes, but his voice was steady. You taught us to be perfect accomplices without realizing we'd use those skills to expose you instead. David looked at his wife of 30 years, the stranger who had orchestrated this elaborate con, and his business partner who had betrayed decades of trust. In their faces, he saw not the people he had loved and trusted, but actors whose masks had finally slipped. The truth had done its work. Allison Roberts Chambers had vanished, leaving only Angela Martinez, the con artist whose schemes had finally caught up with her. Paul Sterling, the trusted partner and secret betrayer, sat amidst the ruins of his careful plans. And between them stood the only truth that mattered, a family bound not by blood or deception, but by choice, love, and hard-won wisdom. The weight of exposed lies hung heavy in La Maison Cherise's private dining room. David straightened the stack of documents before him, each page representing a piece of the elaborate deception he'd lived with for 30 years. You have a choice, he said, his voice carrying the same authority that had built skyscrapers and shaped Chicago's skyline. Though it's more than you deserve. Allison's perfectly manicured fingers curled around her water glass, her knuckles white. Beside her, Paul's business facade had crumbled entirely, leaving only a hollow shell in an expensive suit. What kind of choice? Paul asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped forward, lawyer mode engaged. Option 1. You both sign over your company's shares now. Walk away. Never contact this family again. We'll give you 24 hours to leave the state. Option 2, Olivia continued, her marketing executive's training evident in her precise tone. We release everything. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence about Angela Martinez's crimes and Paul Sterling's embezzlement. The press release is already drafted. Ryan, the youngest but perhaps the most wounded, added quietly, choose carefully. Mom's other families have been waiting years for answers. They're very interested in her current location. Allison's eyes darted between the documents, her children, and David. The consummate con artist was running scenarios, calculating angles, looking for escape routes. You're bluffing, she tried. David would never risk the company's reputation. The company will survive, David interrupted. It was built on integrity, not lies. Something you never understood. The chandelier light played across the evidence spread before them. 3 decades of deception laid bare in contracts, photographs, and bank statements. The wedding photos had long since faded from the screen, replaced by the stark truth of Angela Martinez's mugshots. Time is running out, Ethan warned. The choice is simple. Leave voluntarily, or we involve the authorities. You'd really do that? Paul's voice cracked. To your own mother? Your real father? Our real father is sitting right there, Olivia said, her tone ice cold. The man who taught us right from wrong, who showed us what integrity means. Biology doesn't make a parent. Love does. David watched his children, these remarkable adults who had orchestrated this moment of truth. They stood united, 3 pillars of strength formed not by blood, but by choice. The papers are ready, Ethan said, producing another folder. Full transfer of company shares, non-disclosure agreements, formal resignations. Sign them, and you have until this time tomorrow to disappear. Allison's hand shook as she reached for the pen. You really think it's that simple? That 30 years of life just ends? No, David said quietly. The life you're talking about ended 6 months ago when Ethan found that case file. Maybe it never really existed at all. The scratch of pen on paper seemed unnaturally loud in the elegant room. First Allison, then Paul, signing away the fruits of their 30-year con. With each signature, their carefully constructed world crumbled further. You won't see us again, Allison said, standing abruptly. Her composure was back, but it was different now, brittle, like a sheet of ice about to crack. You've made your choice. No, Ryan corrected. You made your choices 30 years ago. We're just finally seeing them clearly. As Allison and Paul moved toward the door, David spoke one last time. The police already know, by the way, about Angela Martinez's whereabouts. Ethan's firm made sure of that. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving behind the wreckage of 30 years of lies and the foundation of something new, something built on truth rather than deception. The weight of truth settled heavily in the elegant dining room of La Maison Charisse. David sat at the table, surrounded by his children and the scattered evidence of their months-long investigation. The chandelier light seemed softer now, less revealing, as if the worst of the harsh truths had already been exposed. Dad, Ryan's voice was hesitant, carrying the weight of unasked questions. David looked at these 3 remarkable adults, not his by blood, but his in every way that mattered. The discovery had shaken him deeply, forcing him to reevaluate every memory, every moment of the past 30 years. I need time, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, to process all of this, to understand everything. Ethan nodded, his lawyer's mask slipping to reveal the worried son beneath. We know. That's why we've already restructured the company leadership. Olivia will handle public relations, I'll manage legal affairs, and I'll finish college first, Ryan interrupted, but I've been learning the financial systems. I can help part-time until graduation. David felt something tighten in his chest, pride warring with pain, love battling betrayal. These children who weren't his had done everything to protect him, to save not just his company, but his dignity. The trusts are already set up, Olivia added gently. Preston helped us create irrevocable structures for the company shares. Your lawyer can verify everything. We wanted you to know. We needed you to know. We weren't doing this for the money. I know. David reached out, touching the stack of evidence they'd gathered. 6 months of investigation, of protection, of love manifested in the most painful way possible. I never doubted that. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Ryan broke it, his voice small despite his adult frame. Will we? Will we still be your children? The question cracked something in David's carefully maintained composure. Listen to me. All of you. Biology doesn't make a father. 30 years of love, of teaching, of growing together. That's what makes a family. I need time to process the betrayal. Yes, but not betrayal by you. Olivia's marketing executive poise crumbled as tears spilled down her cheeks. We were so afraid, she whispered, that knowing the truth would make you see us differently. The truth, David said carefully, is that you chose integrity over comfort, protection over ease, love over biology. How could I see you as anything but my children after that? Ethan cleared his throat, emotion making his lawyer's voice rough. The company will run smoothly. We've thought of everything. You can take whatever time you need. David nodded, understanding the gift they were offering. Space to heal, time to rebuild, all while knowing his life's work and his children's futures were secure. I'd like that, he said quietly. Some time, but not too much. Not enough to forget what matters most. The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the heavy weight of secrets, but the peaceful quiet of truth finally spoken. The wedding photos were gone from the screen, the evidence of lies nearly cleared away. What remained was simpler, harder, more real. The chandelier light caught their faces. Ethan's steady strength, Olivia's fierce protection, Ryan's open heart. In their eyes, David saw not the shadow of their biological father, but the reflection of the values he'd spent 30 years teaching them. A new kind of family sat in that elegantly appointed room, one built not on blood or legal documents, but on choice, truth, and hard-won wisdom. The path forward would not be easy, but it would be real. Every step, every word, every moment authentic in a way their previous life had never been. The company would survive, probably thrive under the shared leadership of these remarkable siblings. Family gatherings would be less frequent for a while, but they would be genuine. The empire David had built would continue, its foundation strengthened by the very trial that could have destroyed it. David looked at his children, his by choice, by love, by the kind of truth that transcends DNA. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, the wound of deception still raw. But beneath it all, stronger than any lie, was the unshakable certainty that he had not failed as a father. The proof sat before him. 3 adults who had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over ease, love over blood. A new foundation, built on the hardest and most precious kind of truth. In the gentle light of La Maison Cherise's chandeliers, a different kind of family began to emerge from the ashes of exposed lies. It would take time to rebuild, to find their new normal, to heal the wounds of deception. But they would do it together, bound not by blood, but by choice, truth, and mutual respect. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chambers Tower's executive floor, catching the silver in David Chambers' hair. As he reviewed the quarterly reports, at 60, he carried himself with the same quiet authority that had built his empire, though time and truth had softened some of his edges. The door opened, and Olivia strode in, tablet in hand. At 30, she'd grown into her role as VP of Public Relations with the same grace she applied to everything else. "Dad," "You should see this," she said, placing the tablet before him. The headline read, "Angela Martinez, notorious con artist, sentenced to 20 years. Below it, a courthouse photograph showed a woman David barely recognized. Allison's carefully maintained beauty stripped away by 3 years on the run and 2 years of trial proceedings. They found her in Buenos Aires, Olivia explained, settling into one of the visitor chairs. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit finally traced one of her aliases through a series of real estate transactions. Paul's offshore accounts led them right to her. David nodded, studying the photograph. The woman who had been his wife for 30 years looked brittle now, her designer clothes replaced by prison orange, her confident smile gone. And Paul? Still serving his 15-year sentence in federal prison, Olivia replied. The SEC investigation uncovered even more than we knew about. He'd been running similar schemes with 3 other construction companies. The intercom buzzed, and David's assistant announced Ethan's arrival. At 33, his oldest had left Whitman and Blake to become Chambers Construction's chief legal officer. Though the company was now simply Chambers Construction, the sterling name long since removed. "I just saw the news," Ethan said as he entered, his lawyer's briefcase replaced by a tablet and a more relaxed demeanor. "Ryan's flying in tonight. Thought we might have dinner at La Maison Charisse for old time's sake." David smiled at the suggestion. The French restaurant had become something of a family tradition in the years since that fateful anniversary dinner. They'd rebuilt their relationships there, one meal at a time, choosing to transform a place of painful truth into one of healing. "How is Ryan's PhD program going?" David asked, though he knew. They all spoke regularly now, their relationship stronger for having been tested. "Defending his dissertation next month," Olivia replied proudly. "His research on financial fraud detection systems is already getting attention from major corporations. Ironic, isn't it? He turned what he learned exposing Mom and Paul into a career." The corner of David's mouth twitched. "Speaking of ironies, did you see the latest letter from the Arizona family?" Ethan nodded. "Our half-siblings. Lisa's youngest just started college, right? Pre-law. Following in her big brother's footsteps," David confirmed. The discovery of Angela Martinez's other families had led to unexpected connections. While they'd never become one big happy family, they'd found something valuable in their shared experience, a way to turn pain into purpose. Olivia's phone chimed with a text. "Preston's coming to dinner too. Says he has news about the digital security platform he developed based on Mom's case. Apparently, it's caught 3 similar long-term fraud schemes in the past year." David leaned back in his chair, taking in his children's faces. Ethan had recently become a father himself, his daughter named Clara after David's mother. Olivia was engaged to a fellow PR executive who'd proven his worth by making her laugh instead of trying to impress her with credentials. Ryan, the youngest, had found his passion in preventing others from experiencing what their family had endured. "Have you heard from the recovery group?" David asked. Over the years, Angela Martinez's victims had formed a support network, helping each other heal while working to prevent similar crimes. "They're doing well," Olivia replied. "The Foundation Scholarship Program is sending 4 kids to college this year, all children of fraud victims who lost everything. We're turning pain into possibility, just like you taught us." The sound of construction drifted up from the street below, where Chambers Construction's latest project was reshaping the skyline. The company had not just survived the scandal but thrived, its reputation for integrity only strengthened by how they'd handled the crisis. "Remember what you said that night?" Ethan asked suddenly. "About biology not making a father?" David nodded, the memory clear despite the passing years. "I meant it then. I mean it even more now." "Clara called you Grandpa for the first time yesterday," Ethan said softly. "Lauren recorded it. Want to see?" As David watched the video of his granddaughter, he marveled at how life had come full circle. The empire he'd built hadn't crumbled under the weight of betrayal. It had been reinforced by truth, strengthened by integrity, carried forward by children who'd chosen him just as he'd chosen them. The door opened again, and Ryan burst in, his flight apparently earlier than expected. At 27, he'd grown into a confident young man, his academic success matched by his determination to protect others from sophisticated fraud. "You're early," Olivia smiled, embracing her younger brother. "Couldn't wait," Ryan grinned. "Besides, I have news. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit wants to implement my detection algorithm nationwide. They think it could have caught Angela's schemes years earlier." David stood, gathering his children. These remarkable adults who had turned trauma into triumph. "La Maison Charisse at 7, he suggested. "We should celebrate properly." As they agreed and began discussing details, David's eye caught the framed photo on his desk. Not the old family portrait of lies, but a newer one. It showed the four of them at Ethan's daughter's christening, their faces alight with genuine joy. Preston stood with him, the friend who'd helped expose the truth and rebuild trust. In the background, the Chicago skyline stretched toward the clouds, including buildings they'd raised together as a real family. The afternoon sun played across the photo, and David remembered another set of pictures, the wedding photos that had cycled on the screen that fateful night. Those images had been perfect but false, while this one captured something messier, but infinitely more precious. Authentic love, hard-won wisdom, chosen family. His phone buzzed with a news alert, another article about Angela Martinez's sentencing. The journalist had interviewed some of her other victims, including the half-siblings in Arizona. Their words echoed what David had learned, that truth, however painful, was preferable to comfortable lies. Paul Sterling's fate had been equally fitting. His criminal empire had crumbled, his schemes exposed, his reputation destroyed. The man who had betrayed trust for profit now spent his days in a federal prison, his business acumen reduced to organizing the prison library. But their stories were footnotes now, cautionary tales in a larger narrative of resilience and redemption. The real story was here in this office, in this family that had chosen each other again and again. That evening, as they gathered at their usual table in La Maison Charisse, Preston raised his glass in what had become a tradition. "To truth," he said simply. David looked around the table, at Ethan discussing law school options with his Arizona half-sister via video chat, at Olivia showing her the latest foundation reports, at Ryan explaining his algorithm's success to an attentive Preston. He saw not the family he'd thought he had, but the family he'd actually built, stronger for having been tested, more precious for being chosen. "To truth," they echoed. And David felt that familiar peace settle over him. The chandelier light caught their faces, each one reflecting the values he'd taught them: integrity, courage, love. The empire they protected had become something greater, not just buildings reaching for the sky, but a legacy of truth and resilience that would outlast any construction. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered in the evening light, each building a testament to what could be built on a solid foundation. But David knew now that his greatest achievement wasn't in steel and concrete. It was in the hearts and minds of these children who had chosen truth over comfort, love over biology, wisdom over ease. The pain of betrayal had long since faded, replaced by the deeper satisfaction of authentic relationships. Angela Martinez and Paul Sterling had tried to destroy what he'd built, not realizing that their actions would instead forge something unbreakable. A family bound not by blood or lies, but by choice, truth, and hard-won love. As the evening wore on, David listened to his children's laughter, their discussions of future plans, their genuine connections with each other. He thought of the foundation helping other fraud victims, of Ryan's work preventing future schemes, of the support network that had grown from shared pain. The empire hadn't just survived. It had transformed into something far more meaningful than Allison or Paul could have ever understood. It had become a force for truth, a source of healing, a testament to the power of choosing what's right over what's easy. And in that transformation, David had found not just peace, but purpose. The betrayal that might have destroyed him had instead revealed the true strength of his legacy, not in the buildings that bore his name, but in the hearts of the children who had chosen to bear his values. The night drew to a close, but the story continued, in Clara's first steps, in the foundation's growing impact, in Ryan's innovations, in Olivia's engagement, in Ethan's leadership. The truth had set them free, not just from lies, but from the fear of lies, allowing them to build something real and lasting and true. In the end, that was the greatest victory, not over Angela and Paul, but over the power of deception itself. They had chosen truth, chosen each other, chosen love. And in that choice, they had built something no con artist could ever fake. A genuine family, bound by the strongest ties of all, those chosen freely, held honestly, and cherished truly.